Sure.
This presentation is about the gaming industry between the years 1990 to 2006. On particular, we will be focusing on a company called Sony. Sony is known for its incredible products like the PlayStations and its incredible headsets. Now in this presentation, we will talk about Atari and the history of gaming. Atari was the first commercially available gaming device available on the market. Then we will talk about understanding the gaming market, who are the buyers, what do they want, and how can we capitalize on their interests. Then we will be talking about the timeline of gaming devices. What were the devices, when did they arrive in the market, and how did they change the market itself. Because the devices are not only affected by the market is also affected by the devices, as we can see in the case of Atari. Then we will talk about the hardware of gaming, the challenges of hardware which has plagued the community for a long amount of time, and how can multiple brands navigate these challenges, because there are multiple strategies and some brands have chosen some. Then we talk about profitability of the market. What are the multiple ways of generating revenue? Because revenue models have changed throughout the years. For example, in the starting of the market, the revenue source was mostly the sale of the cassettes and the gaming system itself. However, now gaming systems are actually sold at a loss. Last, we will talk about the portable handhelds. Introduction of smartphones in a new era. Because this is a thing which can change the market completely. Atari and the first gaming systems. The first gaming system is Odyssey. It was a game by Atari. It was very simple. You connect it to your TV and then you can play. It was the first of such devices. It was innovative and good. It achieved moderate market success. Not too much for the investment it had. But it had a successor. The successor's name was Pong. Pong completely changed the market in the arcades and as the home market as well. Millions of copies were sold and it made the entire industry what it is today. You have to understand that before Pong came into the market, there was no market. It was a completely new product. Imagine cars in the day of horses. They had to create their own space. After Pong's success, the company Atari faced competition. There was a gaming system similar to that called Fairchild Channel F in 1976. This new device was superior to Pong in every way. If you talk about computing power, then yes. Speed at which the graphics were delivered, yes. Ease of access, cost, everything. Also, it had a new benefit which Pong lacked. It had its own video cassette system. It was not called the video cassette system, obviously. It was called Fairchild cartridge system. That system essentially allowed them to store videos, store movies, and to record whatever was happening on their devices. Pong was not able to compete with this. Atari released something called 2600 VCS. This technologically superior model had all the capabilities of their competition, but it was cheaper and could store twice the amount in the same device. For example, a standard cartridge by Fairchild had an hour of storage, whereas a standard cartridge with Atari had 2 hours. It had a profitability of 300 to 500%, and as a result, it succeeded very well in the market. Now, it had deviated. It was not only a gaming product, it was a device for regular consumers as well. Because, for example, a person wants to record a TV match, because at that time that was not common. Information got broadcasted across the TVs. So, there's a match particularly now. You want to make sure that the match is recorded. This was a very easy way. Not to say that there were no other systems competing with this. There were. But this combined two features into one. As a result, it served dual markets. Therefore, it was successful. In 1979, other players entered the market. You might know Philips Electronics, Mattel, Coleco, and RCA. Yet, Atari kept 2/3 of its market share, and the entire market was approximately $3 billion by 1982. Now we have to talk about the collapse of the gaming industry. As every market goes, it has its ups and downs. The gaming industry collapsed very, very quickly in 1983. The reason was very simple. After Atari had taken over the market, there were a large amount of copycats which entered. These were mostly from foreign countries and their quality was very low because there was no standard procedure for quality control. It gave the market a very bad reputation and it stopped newer consumers from entering the market. See, if a product cannot differentiate itself from the existing models, then it only has one option to do. It only has cost, and that is what competitors used. The competitors sold a lot on the image that Atari had created. However, because of their low quality, the entire market was branded as a low quality market, and as a result, people stopped buying the consoles. Another disaster. To reduce and to solve this problem, Atari tried to make a video game. A game that would be the most popular game in all of history. And the idea was good. However, they focused on unrealistic deadlines. The deadline was so tight that the gaming department, the developers, had to create a game in 1 month's time. And they were not able to. As a result, the game flopped, and more than 5 million copies of the game had to be dumped in a dump yard in New Mexico. After this, Atari was forced to sell itself. In 1983, Atari posted a $536 billion loss. It was sold at a substantial discount in 1984, primarily for its patents. Its business model had deteriorated completely. However, the market remained collapsed for the next half decade. Then, by the rise of Nintendo, the market opened up, and Nintendo reawakened the market by storm. Nintendo is the prime. Now, first you need to understand what is the gaming market today and what was the gaming market then. Because there's no point of talking about all the different models, all the different ways in the market evolved if we do not know the background details. First are the consumers for a specific IP. For example, games like Street Fighter, NFL. These games do not deviate from the previous versions significantly. However, they do the best in the market. More so usually than completely new concepts. This is the power of IP. This is the primary reason that companies fight for it. If you look, this is very similar to the movie industry. Any movie series which you think is popular, Kung Fu Panda, Ice Age, every one of them have sequels and sequels and sequels. Sometimes the sequels are very great, but sometimes they are just a cash grab. No matter what, the sequels always do better than a brand new movie. There are only few exceptions to this. So, a very simple strategy for investors is to go with what always works. This will harm the market in the long term and will not allow the company to keep on edge. However, it's a very good source of revenue. So, what most corporations do is they try these ready-made formulas time and time again, and they spend some part of their revenue on newer attempts. Then the new group is the Asian gamers. It's a generation that grew up with Atari itself. You have to realize that while the generation grew up with Atari, they had no financial control. But now, almost a decade later, these were young adults with a sense of nostalgia who had disposable income. These people desired more complex games, better games which are more mature and more technologically superior. For example, these people were not content with the ball and paddle tennis on the TV. They wanted something else. They wanted FPV shooters, things like that. And this is what the new companies in the market capitalized on. This is one of the largest consumers of the games in the earlier times. Now, as you can see, the size of this particular group has not been increasing at the same rate as the other groups. However, this group still constitutes more than 40% of the market. Next is the buying parents. Although most parents did not play games at the time, nor do they do now, they buy for their children. Marketing to them has unique challenges. To understand these challenges, more thorough analysis is required, but they must be kept in consideration while developing a game. Next is the new generation. This is the most unique group in our study. This is because they do not buy any games directly because they do not have disposable income. However, they influence the buying parents group to buy games for them. What you need to understand is they do not make this group buy games. They motivate that group to do so. A lot of the games which were very popular in the early 2000s, for example, were educational games. which this group did not ask for. However, those sold the most. In the modern age, however, those games are not the primary sellers. Last group which you need to consider are the PC gamers and pirates. Any game you make, if you release it on a PC, then pirating it becomes incredibly easy. You might notice that a lot of games, like currently GTA 6 which is coming to the market, will not come to PCs for more than a year. And it first go to consoles. Why? Because once a game is on a system like a PC, it's very easy to pirate. And pirates are a very large demographic. It's very difficult to deal with them and multiple challenges have to be used. For example, if we talk about multiple consoles that were very popular back in the day, a lot of them could not compete because of this piracy issue. Once people figured out how to control the digital consoles and how to pirate them, the companies could not sell games on their own. Now, we talk about the gaming timeline. From 1972 to 1984, Atari created the first generation of gaming adults. Then, Nintendo entered in 1983. Famicom, Nintendo Super, and this restarted the gaming market. Now, we see 1983 as a starting, right? But they entered only Japan in 1983. The actual growth of the entire market happened in 1985. 2 years later, when they entered US. It took them approximately 3 years to actually control the market. Because the fall of Atari had really reduced everyone's expectations, and as a result, it was very difficult to sell their products. It started with Nintendo applied was to all the technical stores at that time, which sold computers like Radio Shack. They used to give free Nintendos to the stores with only one condition. They would sell it to them at a very reduced price if they keep it on demonstration 24/7 whenever the show was open. As a result, people were able to demonstrate their products, and this succeeded pretty well. Now let's talk about the entry of Nintendo more. Nintendo focused more on quality over quantity. Nintendo realized that the problem with the entire market in the fall of Atari was the rise of cheap copycats and the rise of low quality games that people did not want to use. So they developed a very good quality control mechanism. Every game which could be used on their consoles had to be made specifically for that console. All the games were developed very well. They supported in-house talent, and external developers were compensated very well. But they had a lot of constraints on those developers as well. Charged licensees 20% of the $30 price for every game sold. This was a very big deal because this was not very common in that era. However, because of the success of the console, people were able to sell more of their games if they partnered up with Nintendo than otherwise. As a result, all of those people were forced to work with Nintendo. And working with Nintendo was simply more profitable because the reach was very high. Manufacturing costs of the system in advance had to be paid, and 10,000 unit minimum order was implemented, which became a 30,000 minimum order in 1985. Yeah, also, an exclusivity clause was created, such that, let's say I have a game, let's say I have a game XYZ. If I create XYZ for Nintendo console, within the next 2 years, I cannot make it for any other console or any other gaming device. As a result, if I wanted to buy a particular game, I had to buy Nintendo. They crushed the opposition with these anti-competitive practices. Then, in 1990, they had such titles like Mario Super Bros. And The Legend of Zelda. It represented more than 90% of the US home console market, with 30 million NES units sold, which is one for every 3 American households. So as you can see, they were a very popular brand. Now, let's talk about Super Nintendo. Super Nintendo was the new innovation in their technology. It was superior, it was faster, had a better screen, better buttons, more responsive. But it had one very significant problem which led to it never surpassing its parent. It did not have backwards compatibility. Let's say I have a previous Nintendo model. I have 10 games. If I use this, if I buy the Super Nintendo, I cannot play any of them there. If I am a developer, I have made my games, I need to create an entirely new version of them, each for this. As a result, Nintendo Super suffered from a lack of a very large catalog. This also faced immense competition from Sega and Sony, which are very large players at the time. Sega is unfortunately not a very large player today. They shut down their hardware sector in early 2000s. Now, after the entry of Nintendo, we can talk about PlayStation 1. PlayStation 1 entered the market in 1994. PlayStation 1 was superior to all the previous models in a very special way. It was the first one to have 3D gaming capabilities. It completely shaped and changed the market. PlayStation 1 sold $700 million. It had $70 million worth of net profit by 1986. This is the design. It was also simple, just like the other one. You connect it either to a TV or to a projector. If you open up this part, there was a mini projector inside. Powering it was very simple and cartridges could just be inserted on the side. It was just a very simple plug and play mechanism. And its primary selling point was gaming. However, it realized what Atari did right. The same way Atari had the VHS, they had the CD. They did not invent the CD. However, they had the capability to act as a CD driver. Let's say you had a video, anything you wanted to write on a CD or read from a CD. PS1 could do that. It also had a lot more capability so that 3D games could be developed on it. While it was in the market, there was no competition. And I mean it when I say that. When it was announced and when it was deployed, for the next 3 years, no console in the market sold more than 1 million units. This took everything. It had a very robust game library. It was not restrictive like Nintendo. It realized that if it wants to compete with an already pre-established brand, it cannot develop all its games in-house. It does not have the talent. It cannot make all the developers developing games for Nintendo work for them as well. They cannot be restrictive and they cannot put the same pricing options. So what they did was very simple. Independent game developers, they supported them. They would grant independent game developers a large sum of money if they liked their idea, and what they would take ownership of was the IP. All the profits from the game initially would go to cover the cost of the PSP and the manufacturing of the cartridges. As the initial cost was completed, a small royalty would go to Sony and the remaining amount would go to the developer, up to as high as the amount would be. Let us say that the thing failed. In that case, the developer would still get compensation. As a result, it was a very low risk strategy for most developers. A lot of companies started up to develop models specifically for the PS1. My market share by 1999 was like this. 60% was PlayStation, 30% was Nintendo, and 5% was Sega. PS1 only had one problem in its entire structure. It was expensive. That was a very large problem for this gaming console. However, they had a large enough profit margin that all their development costs for the entire research into the market was covered by this single model. After the PlayStation 1's entry into the market, we have the PlayStation 2 in 2000, 6 years after the original product was deployed. It followed the same procedure. However, instead of CDs, it now had DVD. You need to understand why are DVDs such a big deal over the CDs? Because they store a lot more data. If you want better games, more powerful 3D games, you want anything, you want entire movies on a single disc, DVDs could do that. And DVDs could do it for cheaper. Also, people do not have DVD playing devices on their home. If they wanted to play a DVD for any reason at all, they have two options. Either they pay the same amount of money for a DVD reader, or they pay a little bit lesser amount of money for the PS2. After 2 months of its debut, they actually increased the price a bit. Instead of decreasing it, they increased it. Now the dip of the prices in the first 2 months was because of a very specific thing which they did with the game developers. They want to popularize the console a lot. They realized that primary way of marketing is not through ad campaigns, it's through word of mouth. If people brought a PS2 and their friends saw them with a PS2, they would ask their parents to get one for them. Also, as I told you about the aging gamers, that demographic was the primary consumer of this. It had a built graphics card, it had built console capabilities. This was a PS2. If you look at it, you will see the entire difference in the design itself. Market share by early 2006 was this. PS2 was 55%, Microsoft Xbox was 24%, Nintendo GameCube was 15%, and Microsoft Xbox 360 was 6%. And 8 out of the top 10 games were selling with the PS2. Now, you might think it is market share and think PS2 did not increase the profits by a lot, right? But that's wrong. Because by the time PS2 came around, they realized the majority of the profit does not lie in the console itself, but the games. They were starting to sell the consoles at a loss, and they would remake the amount of money through the games. As you can see, this is a way more reliable indicator. 8 out of 10 of the top games which were selling for the PS2. And only the PS2. Any game that was on the PS2 did not have any alternate for a year with any other of the other devices. Now, we are not talking about Microsoft Xbox in an analysis. My partner there was supposed to do that. And we will do it later. Microsoft did not enter the sector to win, as is suspected by many. Microsoft entered to get data. It entered to understand the market. And as a result, there are only two practical contenders in the actual market today, Sony and Microsoft. Nintendo has lost a lot, and Nintendo has resorted to primarily selling software, because software is actually speaking a lot more profitable than hardware in most cases. Now let's talk about the hardware of gaming. How did all of these things change, and what can we learn from it? I told you about VHS and cartridges. These two were the contenders. Then came the CDs and the DVDs. By the time when PS3 came around, DVDs were again outpaced. DVDs were no longer good enough. And yeah, I need to remind you of one other thing. These technologies, right, they are backwards compatible. Which means if I have a DVD player, I can use a CD to read the same game. As a result, it's cheaper for my company if they only require, let's say, a performance equivalent to a CD. After PS3 came around, PS3 supported Blu-ray, whereas Xbox supported HD DVD. This led to a lot of competition in the market, and eventually Blu-ray won. Now, I want to remind you of another technology, another gaming console that was released by Sony a while ago. It was released in early 2006, and it succeeded, and it did pretty well in the market. It was not able to defeat its contender from Nintendo, but it sold more than 60 million copies. If which you remember was larger than the entire amount of copies of the PS1 sold. This is the device called a PlayStation Portable. PlayStation Portable came with two different new media storage formats, which were added by Sony. One is the UMD and one is the Memory Stick Duo. UMD was completely game changing. However, due to some constraints, it did not succeed. Primarily due to the ability of SSDs and hard disks to be included and the emergence of internet. It had an inbuilt UMD reading cartridge. You could put a UMD is basically a small version of a CD. You could put it there and you could read it. There was also a Memory Stick Duo, a stick which you could put here and it would act kind of like a pen drive. Next. If you talk about internet gaming completely changed the market. The competition between PS3 and Xbox primarily was fought along this route. And today, all of these technologies are outdated. They are not used anymore. There were two options at the time of the internet: broadband and dial-up connections. Dial-up connections eventually lost, and broadband is what we follow today. Then was processing power. You might be thinking, why do so many newer games develop? And why is there such a large catalog of them? The reason is, every year according to Moore's law, practically speaking, processors double in transistor count. which more or less doubles their power. As a result, game developers have more and more features that they can add. They can add better graphics, they can add more capability. Then there is the RAM. Another fact about consoles and why they dominate over the PC market is that they don't really need to run a separate operating system the same way other PCs do. In the PCs, the games which run have to interact with the operating system, which reduces the speed a lot and which takes a lot more manpower and resources to develop. Now RAM is limited, and usually it is the bottleneck for most of the games, which were there till 2020. Now, since consoles do not need to run an OS, the RAM requirements are very low. Still, they increase after every generation. Let me give you a very practical example. You know the PSP which I just showed you, it has only 32 megabytes of RAM. With 32 megabytes of RAM, it can run God of War. It can run GTA Vice City Stories. It can run 3D games like this. And primarily, those are the type of game it runs. So consoles with only a little amount of RAM and a very low processing power can do a lot more than PCs. That is one of the primary factors at why do they succeed over the PC. Let us say I am trying to spend $300. If I spend $300 on a PC and $300 on a console, my gaming experience on a console will be better. Only way my experience on a PC will be better is if I spend a lot more, which a lot of people do because PCs have other users than gaming. But that's not a large percentage of the market. That needs to be considered. Now let's talk about the revenue sources. This is the most important part. You will see it on the console. It's often very low actually. Only type of consoles which actually make money nowadays are the portable consoles. For example, after the era of PS1, Xbox was sold at $130 per unit loss and PS3 at $250 per unit loss. This means that if I have a PS3 which I am selling to the consumer, I lose $250 on every single one. I make money through the sale of licensed video games. $5 to $7 of the standard industry fee for software sold for the consoles. Companies like Microsoft tried to hire talent in-house. Let me remind you that this $5 to $7 was when the cost of an average game was $30. Now, if I talk about the AAA titles which come now, the percentage more or less remains the same and it depends on each game. So, as a general rule, we can say if there is a $90 game being sold, $20 are going to whatever game console manufacturer is there. Using these console manufacturers make money. This is not the only thing. Next are the subscription-based models. You might have thought about and read about Xbox Game Pass, most likely. Services like Xbox Game Pass allow for regular and predictable revenue for the company. It also helps the consumers a lot. Let us say they are not sure about a game. Instead of spending a very large amount of money on it, they can buy a relatively cheaper Game Pass and they can try a lot more games. Only downfall is you have to keep paying the company to have control over the game. The moment you stop paying, you lose access to the game as well. If you talk about, let's talk about some other revenues. Mobile games revenue worldwide. As you can see, it has increased drastically. It's expected if it follows the same format. By 2027, it's going to go up to $376 billion. Now, if you look at the game developer acquisitions, this is one of the very good indicators of the gaming market. You can see that acquisitions have been increasing dramatically. Now you are thinking of the fall at 2003. Why? This is because PSP and PS3 was released roughly around this time, and development for it started here. As you can see, most game acquisitions happen years before the actual model is released. So if you want to succeed in the gaming market, you have to plan years in advance. It's more difficult now as new challenges approach. For example, VR. VR is the thing which is going to change the gaming markets forever. If you look at Sony Corporation's share of sales, then you can see this is the total revenue shot. Games only comprise 12% of the revenue, and 64% of the revenue comes from electronics. Upon seeing this graph, you might be thinking, will they not lose money? Because I just told you, they make their money through video games, right? How is revenue higher in electronics? That's because it's the revenue. They sell this at a loss and they make money through whatever this part of the pie is there. However, that pie is so large, it's increasing at such a drastic rate that it's still profitable. If you look at 2023 PC and console games revenue by type, this is revenue only for games. Then you can see full game licenses only cost 37%. So let's say I buy a game on average. Then my company will only make 37% of the revenue from that. 28% is from add-on content like DLCs. Subscription individual is 17%. Subscription multi-revenue is 18%. So the subscription has actually grown up to be as large as the cost of games themselves. Now, after the entry of PlayStation 2, let me talk to you again about portable gaming. Now, 2001, Game Boy was released as the first portable gaming device. It was successful in the market. There were a lot of devices before this, but none could compare. They went as a primary player in the new growing market. Then in November 2004, Nintendo DS was released. This was a very large challenge for Sony because of extensive catalog, lightness, and extreme capabilities. It was one of the first times Nintendo was actually able to challenge Sony after PS1. Then, 1 month later, Sony released the PSP. It was an incredible machine, and let me remind you, it was more powerful than a PS2 and a handheld. Every game that the PS2 could run, it could run better. It had hours of battery and it had full internet capabilities. So this PSP right here, I could actually use it as a phone. I could do internet calling with it. I could view the internet. I could view YouTube. I could do all the things I could do with a regular phone. And if you see, at 2004, smartphones were not there in the market as a popular device. Then smartphones came in the late 2000s. Due to them being a necessity, and since everybody had them, portable gaming decreased significantly. It was a very large challenge, and still is the challenge. But smartphones have something that these gaming consoles do not, and that is analog control. Once you are using a joystick, you know exactly where your fingers are going, and that matters to the experience. Smartphones are never able to deliver the same experience, and as a result, they will not succeed in the market moving on. Now let's talk about the failure of PSP. It's not truly a failure. It sold more than 80 million units. It earned a lot more than all the previous consoles in fact. But Nintendo DS sold 154 million copies. Failure is a complex case, but boils down to piracy, competition, and the UMD drive. They had a very restrictive model of gaming actually. It was a complete choice by the corporates. The only way in which you could legitimately play a game on the PSP is through a UMD cartridge. And since people did not want to buy UMD because it did not work on any other device, people just didn't buy it that often. What happened was that a few people discovered how to hack the PSP, how they could hack its firmware, and how they could play games on it, their own software for free. And that's what everyone has done on their PSPs. Now, let me tell you an interesting fact. In India, PSPs were very popular. However, PSP games on the drives, they were less than the number of PSPs sold. PSPs were being bought with the intention to pirate them. Instead, if Sony had put up a marketplace for all these games to be available online, they would have earned a lot more revenue. However, they did not do that. They did not go for the subscription model at that time, and that was one of the primary reasons why a superior model failed. Now, the new step forward. Today, the portable market has had a resurgence. It is a prime time for a new generation of PSP. Have you guys heard about Nintendo Switch? It's a very popular gaming console, and if you look at the revenue and the way it is sold, it outshines all the previous ones from the last 15 years. Sure, it did not earn the same money as a PS5, but you should also look at what is the total cost of it. If you look at it from a perspective of percentage of profits, then portable handhelds earn a lot more. As VR technologies enter the gaming scene, as cloud computing enters, is going to be a very large change. A very large limitation of consoles was the fact that they could not gain a lot quickly. They could not process a lot of information. As graphics cards have improved, as AI has emerged, as AI can actually generate frames now, as things like this go, consoles can completely change the way they work. One approach which is being tried by Microsoft is that they will do cloud computing. So essentially you will have an Xbox and you could play, the processing of the game would happen somewhere else. And as long as you have a decent internet connection, you could play that game. Sure, that's not a workable approach for competitive gaming. But how many people actually game competitively? The vast majority of the market is made for people who do not do that. And it's way cheaper for a company to have a large server on which they can run the game than for every individual to have the equipment to run it themselves. Also, if this happens, that could lead to the end of piracy from the company side. Games could be made in such a way that you could not physically play them on your devices unless you have an exceptionally powerful device. This will allow companies like Sony and companies like Microsoft to take control of the market once again. And as you can see, this industry is a very unique industry. During the 2020 lockdown, this industry increased dramatically. People thought that when the lockdown would end, when all of these things would end, the industry would shrink. But something other than that happened. This industry grew even faster. Now, games have reached the same level as mass entertainment. Games are earning more money than movies. Games are earning a lot. If you look at the most anticipated game of perhaps the last 2 decades, it's GTA 6. And if you look at every announcement, the amount of publicity it gets, you will realize that the gaming industry has a lot of potential. Now, depending on whatever way a company goes, they will either utilize cloud computing and all the other features I talked about, or they will cease to exist. Thank you.